The mud had swallowed the cart up to its axles, and Retta Parvus watched her morning's harvest sink deeper with each futile heave against the wheel. Spring runoff had turned the market road into a quagmire, and here she stood, green hands slipping on wet wood, tusks bared in frustration as a season's worth of early radishes, spring onions, and tender lettuces threatened to tip sideways into the muck. Her village's weekly market trip had drawn a small crowd of both orcs and humans, all of them watching from drier ground, and not a single soul had stepped forward to help. Then he did. The human was broader across the shoulders than most men she had seen, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the drizzle and work-roughened hands already reaching for the cart's frame. He did not ask permission. He simply waded into the mud until it sucked at his knees, braced his boots against something solid beneath the surface, and wrapped both arms around the undercarriage. "Wait," Retta started to say, but the word died when she saw his back bunch beneath his soaked shirt. He lifted. The cart groaned, wood shrieking against packed earth and stone. His face went red, then purple, veins standing out along his neck, and Retta could only stare as the entire left side of the cart rose from the mud with a wet, obscene sound. He took one step backward, then another, dragging the wheel free through sheer brute force. When the cart finally settled onto solid road, he released it gently and stood there breathing hard, covered from waist to boots in thick brown slurry. Someone from her village, old Marga, whispered loud enough for half the road to hear. Strong as a bull, that one. The name stuck before Retta even learned his real one. She found out 3 days later when he appeared at her family's riverside farm with a cracked plow blade and an excuse so transparent it made her mother laugh out loud. His name was Roland Garrett. He owned the western grain fields that bordered the river 2 miles upstream, and he wanted to know if her father knew a good smith for ironwork repairs. "The smithy is in your village, Master Garrett," Retta's father said, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You passed it on your way here." Roland Garrett stood in their doorway, hat in hands, and his grin was shameless. "So I did, but I heard your daughter knows quality work when she sees it, and I wanted a second opinion." Retta, who had been sorting seed potatoes at the kitchen table, felt heat creep up the back of her neck. "I sell vegetables, not metalwork." "Still," he said, turning that grin on her, "you strike me as someone with good judgment." Her mother intervened before Retta could throw a potato at him. "The smith 2 villages south does excellent work. Tell him Marga's son-in-law sent you." "Marga," Roland repeated, and his eyes lit with recognition. "She was there at the road, kind woman." "She also," Retta said coolly, "started that ridiculous nickname. The bull," his grin widened. "I've been called worse." He left with directions to the distant smith, whistling, and Retta's mother waited exactly 10 seconds before dissolving into laughter. "That boy is smitten." "That man," Retta corrected, "wants something." "Oh, he wants something," her father agreed, but his tone was gentle. "The question is what?" Retta knew what. She had played this game before. 2 years ago, a merchant's son from the human trading town had courted her with flowers and poetry, right up until her father mentioned that Retta would inherit the riverside acreage, at which point the poetry had become very specific about land management and crop yields. Last summer, a young orc from the northern hills had promised her the moon, then casually asked her father about water rights during the betrothal negotiation. The Parvus family land was small but precious. 20 acres of river-fed soil that never went dry, even in drought years, positioned perfectly between the orc village and the human settlements. Everyone wanted it. No one, Retta had learned, wanted just her. So when Roland Garrett came back 4 days later with a basket of early strawberries and another flimsy excuse, she met him at the gate and did not invite him in. "My cow has gone lame," he said, as if this explained his presence. "I heard your mother knows animal medicine." "We raise vegetables, Master Garrett, not livestock." "Roland," he corrected. "And I could have sworn I saw goats in your upper field. 3 goats do not make us herders." Retta crossed her arms. "The animal doctor is in your village, same as the smith. Already saw him. He said to rest her and keep the hoof clean, but I wanted a second opinion." He held out the strawberries. "These are from my southern field, first of the season." They were beautiful, deep red and perfectly ripe, and Retta's mouth watered just looking at them. She kept her expression neutral. "Your southern field is nowhere near a road to our farm. I took the scenic route, through 2 miles of forest. I like trees." Despite herself, Retta felt her lips twitch. He was absurd, transparent. And there was something disarming about how little he tried to hide it, standing there covered in trail dust with leaves in his hair and that ridiculous hopeful smile. She took the strawberries. "My mother is visiting the southern village today. You wasted a trip." "Not wasted," he said. "I got to see you." The words should have sounded oily, practiced. Instead, they came out plain and honest, and Retta found herself wrong-footed. She had armor against smooth talkers, against men who wanted her land and pretended to want her heart. She had no defense against someone who simply stood there and smiled at her like she was the best thing he had seen all week. "You should go home and tend your cow," she managed. "Probably should." He did not move. "Will you be at market next week?" "I am at market every week." "Good." He settled his hat back on his head. "I will look for you." He did. And the week after that. And the one after that. By the 6th week, children in both villages had started mooing when Roland passed, and he took it with such good humor that it only made the nickname more permanent. The bull who pulled the cart from the mud. The bull who bought half of Retta's spring onions every market day, even though everyone knew he grew his own. The bull who once carried old Marga's entire basket of yarn back to the village because she complained her arms hurt, and who somehow always needed to ask Retta's advice about which vegetables kept best, which herbs grew in shade, which melons would be sweetest. "He is courting you," her mother said, matter-of-fact, as they loaded the cart for the 8th market week. "He is wasting his time," Retta replied. "Is he?" Retta secured the last crate of lettuce and did not answer. The truth was more complicated. Roland made her laugh. He showed up in the rain to help her father repair the irrigation gate and refused payment. He remembered everything she told him, from her favorite color to her opinion on the new tax assessments. When he smiled at her, it reached his eyes, and when she caught him watching her across the market square, he did not look away or pretend he had been doing something else. But trust was expensive, and Retta had been sold dreams before. The weather turned strange in late spring. Rain that should have tapered off by planting time kept coming in heavy bursts, and then, as if the sky had spent itself, stopped entirely. By midsummer, the river ran lower than Retta had ever seen it, and the irrigation channels that fed the inland fields began to dry. Her family's land, fed by the deeper river current, stayed green. The human fields to the west, dependent on wells and seasonal streams, began to brown at the edges. Roland still came to market, but the easy lightness had gone from his face. The grain he brought to trade was smaller than it should be, and Retta heard him talking with other farmers about well depth and water tables, his voice low and worried. The villages began to fracture. Small arguments over trade prices became heated. An orc family accused a human miller of short-weighting their flour. A human farmer claimed an orc trader had sold him diseased seed. The accusations were baseless, probably, but in a drought year, fear found fertile ground. The village councils called a joint meeting in late summer, and Retta attended because her father's back was bothering him, and because someone from their family needed to represent their interests. She sat in the back of the gathering hall and watched the two councils face each other across a room that suddenly felt divided. The human headman, a gray, bearded farmer named Warren, spoke first. "We need to discuss water access. The wells are failing, and we must look at alternatives." "The river is open to everyone," said Druva, the Orc Council leader. She was old, sharp-eyed, and not easily moved. "It always has been." "The river is lower every day," Warren countered. "Those with riverside access will have crops, the rest of us will have dust. Then dig deeper wells." "We have. They are dry." The room began to murmur, voices rising. Retta saw fear on both sides, anger simmering just beneath. She saw neighbors who had traded peacefully for decades looking at each other like strangers. "We need to discuss trade agreements," Warren said, and his voice carried over the noise. "Specifically, grain sharing. If our crops fail and yours do not, we will need to buy food. We should establish terms now before desperation sets prices." "Or," said Druva quietly, "we could close our markets and feed our own people first." The room exploded. Humans shouting about broken faith, orcs shouting about exploitation, and through it all Retta sat frozen, watching everything her parents had built, the careful balance of trade and goodwill, threatened to shatter. Then she saw Roland. He stood near the front, silent while everyone else yelled, and his face was carved from stone. When Warren finally called for order and the room quieted, he raised his hand. "The bull wishes to speak," someone muttered, and a few people laughed, but it was brittle laughter, edged with stress. "I have a proposal," Roland said. His voice was steady. "My western fields border the river. I have access to water, same as the Parvus family and the others on the riverside. If we dig a secondary channel, we can extend irrigation to the inland farms." Warren leaned forward. "How much would that cost, in labor?" "A week's work with enough hands, in water." "It would lower the river by a few inches, but not enough to hurt the existing farms." He paused. "In money, I would fund the digging, call it an investment in the region." The room went very quiet. Druva studied him with narrowed eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because if the human farms fail, you lose trade partners. Because if our villages turn on each other, everyone suffers." He met her gaze squarely. "Because it is the right thing to do." "You would pay for a channel that benefits human and orc farms equally." Druva's voice was skeptical. "Forgive me, but young men do not throw money into ditches without expecting something back. And here it comes," Retta thought. The request for land access, for water rights, for some clause that would tip everything in his favor. She braced herself for disappointment. Roland smiled, small and tired. "I expect my neighbors not to starve. If that makes me a fool, so be it." Warren shook his head. "We cannot let you shoulder the entire cost." "Then contribute what you can, and I will cover the rest." Roland shrugged. "I had a good year last harvest. I can afford it." The councils talked for another hour, hammering out details, but the crisis point had passed. The channel would be dug. Trade would continue. And Retta sat in the back row, watching Roland field questions and suggestions with patient good humor, and felt something crack open in her chest. After the meeting, she found him outside, leaning against the hall's stone wall and looking exhausted. "That was stupid," she said. He looked up, and despite everything, he smiled. "Hello to you too. You just spent a fortune on a ditch." "A channel," he corrected. "There is a difference, Roland." She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the worry lines around his eyes. "Why did you really do that?" "I told you. It is the right thing. You could have negotiated, asked for water access to our land or a percentage of the orc harvest or something." The words spilled out faster than she meant them to. "Everyone in that room expected you to leverage this. You could have gotten anything you wanted." "I got what I wanted," he said quietly. "The villages are not going to tear each other apart." Retta stared at him. "You are serious. Always have been." He straightened, and suddenly they were very close, close enough that she could smell sun-warmed cotton and honest sweat. "Retta, I know what people say. I know you think I am courting you for your land. And maybe at first, maybe when I saw you on the road with that cart, I noticed that you were beautiful and wondered who you were. But I kept coming back because you are sharp and funny, and you do not suffer fools, and talking to you is the best part of my week." He took a breath. "I do not want your farm, I want you, and if you never believe anything else I say, believe that." Her throat felt tight. "You spent your savings to prove it. I spent my savings because it needed doing. But yes." His smile turned rueful. "I would be lying if I said I did not hope you might notice." "I noticed," Retta said, and her voice came out rough. "I have been noticing for weeks, Roland. That is the problem." "How is that a problem?" "Because I was supposed to stay smart. I was supposed to keep my guard up." She looked away, blinking hard. "I was not supposed to fall for the bull." His hand came up slowly, carefully, and tipped her chin back toward him. "And did you?" "Yes," she whispered. "Damn you, yes." He kissed her then, soft and certain, and Retta let herself fall. The channel took 9 days to dig, with volunteers from both villages working side by side. Roland was there every day, stripped to the waist and swinging a shovel with the rest of them. And if people gave him knowing looks when Retta showed up with lunch baskets for the workers, well, he took the teasing with the same good humor he took everything else. The first water flowed through on a hot afternoon in late summer, and a cheer went up from both sides. Retta stood with her mother, watching the clear river water spill into the new channel and spread toward the inland fields, and felt her mother's hand squeeze her shoulder. "That boy really loves you," Marga said. "He really does," Retta agreed, and could not keep the wonder from her voice. The drought broke in early autumn, rains returning just in time to save the late crops, and by harvest season both villages were cautiously optimistic. The shared channel had worked. The inland fields had not failed. And more importantly, humans and orcs had worked together and remembered that they could. The joint harvest market was Roland's idea. Instead of 2 separate market days, one large gathering where both villages could trade freely, celebrate the successful harvest, and maybe, just maybe, build on the fragile peace they had found. The councils agreed, and on a bright October morning, the market square filled with stalls and voices, orc and human side by side. Retta sold out of winter squash by noon and spent the afternoon wandering the market with Roland's hand warm in hers. They sampled honey cakes from the human baker, bought smoked fish from an orc vendor, and watched children from both villages play tag between the stalls, shrieking with laughter. As evening fell, Warren and Druva stood on the platform together and called for attention. The crowd quieted and Druva spoke first. "This has been a hard year," she said. "We faced drought, fear, and old suspicions. We could have turned on each other. We did not. And much of that is thanks to one man who saw what needed doing and did it, no matter the cost." She smiled, rare and genuine. "The bull dug us a channel. The least we can do is thank him properly." The crowd erupted in cheers. Roland went red to the ears, and Retta had to bite back a laugh as Warren waved him up to the platform. He climbed up reluctantly, looking like he wanted to sink through the floorboards, and Warren clapped him on the shoulder. "We are calling it the Bull's Run," Warren announced. "The channel seemed fitting." "It is a ditch," Roland protested, but he was grinning. It does not need a name. Too late, Dhruva said. The children have already started calling it that. You are stuck with it. Someone in the crowd mooed long and loud, and the whole square dissolved into laughter. Roland shook his head, helpless, and when his eyes found Retta's in the crowd, she saw nothing but joy there, uncomplicated and bright. Later, when the market had wound down and the stars were coming out, Retta walked with Roland along the river path toward her family's land. The water ran quiet and steady beside them, and the air smelled like wood smoke and the last of the autumn flowers. "I have a question," Roland said. Retta's heart kicked against her ribs. "All right. Your father mentioned that you inherit the riverside acreage." "Here it comes," some small voice whispered, but Retta pushed it down. She had learned to trust this man. She would not doubt him now. "I do," she said carefully. "And if you were to marry, would your husband expect to manage it? That would depend on the husband." Roland stopped walking and turned to face her, and his expression was serious. "If you were to marry me, I would expect you to manage it. It is your land, your skill. I have my own fields. I do not need yours." "Then why are you asking?" "Because I want to know if you would consider marrying someone whose village calls him a barnyard animal." He smiled, but there was vulnerability underneath it, real and raw. "Because I love you, Retta. Because I want to build a life with you, side by side, your land and mine, your people and mine. Because when I look at the future, the only version that makes sense is the one where you are in it." Retta felt tears prick her eyes. "You are asking me. I am asking." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple silver with a small green stone. "Marry me. Let me be your husband, your partner. Let me prove every day that I choose you, not your land, not your connections, just you." She did not make him wait. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Maybe it had. She would not put it past him to have planned this for weeks. "The stone is green," she said, turning her hand to catch the starlight, "like your eyes." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Like the first growing things in spring, like hope." "You are terribly sentimental for a bowl. You love it." "I do," she admitted, and kissed him under the stars, beside the river that had brought them together and would feed their fields for years to come. They married in the spring. A week after the anniversary of the day he pulled her cart from the mud. Both villages came, packing the field between the two settlements until there was no space left to stand. The ceremony blended human and orc traditions, with Dhruva and Warren officiating together, and when they spoke their vows, Retta's voice was steady and sure. "I promise to trust you," she said, holding his hands. "To work beside you, to build something good together." "I promise to love you," Roland replied. "To choose you every day, to be your partner in all things." When they kissed, the crowd cheered, and someone, Retta suspected one of the village children, mooed so loudly that even Dhruva laughed. The celebration lasted until dawn, tables laden with food from both villages, music that blended orc drums with human fiddles, and dancing that left everyone breathless and happy. Retta's mother cried, which made Retta's father cry, which made Retta tear up until Roland handed her his handkerchief and whispered something ridiculous in her ear that made her laugh instead. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the small cottage on Roland's land, the one he had spent the winter expanding to make room for two. He carried her over the threshold, traditional and earnest, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home," he said. Retta looked around at the careful work he had done, the shelves built to her height, the hooks for her market baskets, the window that faced east toward her family's land. "You built this for me. I built it for us." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you like it?" "I love it." She turned in his arms and kissed him slow and deep. "I love you. Good." He grinned against her mouth. "Because you are stuck with me now." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Retta kept managing her family's riverside acreage, and Roland worked his grain fields, and together they became a fixture at the weekly markets, always side by side. The bull and his wife, people said, and the nickname had lost its teasing edge, become something fond instead. The joint harvest market became an annual tradition, growing larger each year as more distant villages heard about the successful human-orc cooperation and wanted to participate. The channel, the Bull's Run, never dried up, even in lean years, and became a symbol of what could be built when people worked together instead of against each other. Retta's mother claimed that she had known from the start that Roland was different, that she had seen the way he looked at Retta that first day on the muddy road, and known he was serious. Retta's father just smiled and said that any man strong enough to lift a loaded cart alone was strong enough to be trusted with his daughter's heart. In their second spring, Retta told Roland she was pregnant over breakfast, casual as commenting on the weather, and he dropped his spoon into his porridge. "You are certain?" "Very." He was around the table in an instant, lifting her out of her chair and spinning her in a circle despite her protests. "We are having a baby." "We will not be having anything if you drop me," Retta said, but she was laughing, holding tight to his shoulders. He set her down carefully, reverently, and pressed his hand to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there. It cannot hear you yet." "It will." He looked up at her, eyes bright. "What do you want, boy or girl?" "Healthy," Retta said firmly. "Everything else is negotiable." Their daughter was born in early winter, small and perfect, with green skin, tiny tusks, and her father's dark eyes. They named her Juliet, and Roland cried when he held her for the first time, big hands cradling her with impossible gentleness. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "She looks like a potato," Retta said, exhausted and happy. "A beautiful potato." He kissed Juliet's forehead, then Retta's. "Thank you for what? For trusting me, for choosing me, for this." Retta's throat went tight. "Thank you for pulling my cart out of the mud." He laughed, soft and wondering. "Best decision I ever made." Juliet grew quickly, a bright and curious child who toddled after her father in the fields and helped her mother sort vegetables at market. By the time she was 3, a second daughter arrived, and they named her Grace, who was quieter than her sister but no less stubborn. The villages continued to thrive, trade growing stronger each year, and the old suspicions faded slowly but surely. Retta and Roland's marriage became a kind of proof, a living example that human and orc could build a life together, raise children, be happy. Other mixed couples began to appear, tentative at first, then more confident as the years passed, and the sky did not fall. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Retta and Roland stood together by the Bull's Run, watching the water flow toward the inland fields. Juliet was chasing butterflies in the grass, and Grace was asleep in Roland's arms, tiny fingers curled around his shirt. "You ever regret it?" Retta asked, then immediately wished she could take the words back. It was an old fear, one she had thought long buried, but Roland just looked at her, patient and steady as always. "Regret what? Marrying the woman I love, raising our children, building a life that makes me happy every single day." He shook his head. "Never, not once. Even though people still call you the Bull, especially because of that," he smiled. "It means they remember what we built. It means something good came from a muddy road and a heavy cart." Retta leaned into his side, careful not to wake Grace. "I am glad you are stubborn. I am glad you are sharp. I am glad you are kind. I am glad you took a chance on me." Juliet ran up then, breathless and grass-stained, and demanded to be picked up. Roland shifted Grace carefully and hoisted Juliet onto his other hip, and Retta stepped back to look at them. Her husband, strong and gentle, holding their daughters like they were made of spun glass. Her children, healthy and loved. Her life, so much fuller than she had ever imagined it could be. "What are you thinking?" Roland asked. Retta smiled. "That I would do it all again. The courting, the drought, the public proposals, all of it." She reached up and kissed his cheek. "Every bit." As the years passed, their family grew. Their third child, a boy they named Marcus, arrived when Juliet was 6 and Grace was 3, and he had his father's broad shoulders even as a baby. He was followed by 2 more daughters, Helena and Pearl, and the house that Roland had built for 2 expanded again and again until it sprawled across the hillside, full of noise and laughter and love. Retta's parents grew old gracefully, delighted by their grandchildren and pleased to see the riverside land in capable hands. When her father finally passed, peacefully in his sleep after a long and happy life, Retta wept in Roland's arms and then rolled up her sleeves and kept working, because that was what her father would have wanted. The villages continued to intertwine. The joint harvest market became a festival, a 3-day celebration that drew traders from across the region. The Bull's Run was expanded twice, supporting irrigation for farms miles inland, and the name stuck through every iteration. Young people in both villages grew up knowing the story, how the bull had pulled a cart from the mud and then dug a channel to save them all, and how he had married the orc girl with the sharp tongue and the sharper business sense. Juliet, as she grew, showed her mother's head for numbers and her father's easy way with people. She took over managing the market stall when Retta's joints began to ache and proved herself a formidable trader. Grace became a scholar, fascinated by crop rotation and soil science, and spent her days experimenting with new planting techniques. Marcus followed his father into the grain fields and showed such promise that Roland started joking about retirement. Helena became a teacher, patient and warm, and Pearl developed a talent for animal husbandry that had neighbors from 3 villages bringing her their sick livestock. On their 20th anniversary, the villages threw Roland and Retta a celebration, and this time no one mooed. Instead, Warren's grandson, who had taken over as headman, stood up and gave a speech about partnership, about trust, about what could be built when people saw past old fears. 20 years ago, he said, a man pulled a cart from the mud and we gained a neighbor. He dug a channel and we gained a partner. He married, raised a family, and showed us what is possible when we choose love over suspicion. So I ask you all to raise your glasses to the bull and his wife, to 20 years of marriage and to 20 more. The crowd cheered, and Retta felt Roland's hand find hers under the table, familiar and warm. 20 more, she murmured. At least, he said, if you will have me. I suppose I am stuck with you. You love it. She did. She loved all of it, the life they had built from mud and stubbornness, and a willingness to trust when trust was hard. She loved the man beside her, gray-haired now but still strong, still kind, still hers. She loved the children they had raised and the grandchildren who would undoubtedly come. She loved the villages that had learned to live together, to work together, to thrive together. When the celebration wound down and they walked home together through the autumn evening, their children and grandchildren streaming ahead, Retta paused at the Bull's Run and looked down at the steady flow of water. "What are you thinking?" Roland asked, because he always asked, because he always wanted to know. "That I am grateful," Retta said, "for muddy roads and stubborn men and second chances." He pulled her close, and they stood there together beside the channel that had saved their villages, watching the water catch the last of the daylight. And Retta thought that this, right here, was what happiness looked like. Not a single grand gesture, but 1,000 small ones, day after day, year after year, building something that would last long after they were gone. The bull's run would flow for generations. The story would be told and retold, embellished and simplified, but the heart of it would remain true. A man saw someone who needed help and helped her. He saw a problem and solved it. He loved a woman and proved it, not with words but with actions, every day for the rest of his life. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Their children married, some to humans, some to orcs, and the grandchildren came in a joyful wave. Juliet married a human carpenter and gave them 2 granddaughters. Grace married an orc scholar and raised 3 children who inherited her love of learning. Marcus took over the grain fields entirely when Roland finally, reluctantly, retired, and he brought in harvests that made his father proud every year. Helena married late, to a widowed baker with 2 children of his own, and filled her house with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Pearl never married at all, perfectly content with her animals and her independence, and Roland made sure everyone knew that she was no less valuable for it. On their 30th anniversary, it was just family, gathered around the long table that Roland had built to accommodate everyone. 3 children, their spouses, 8 grandchildren ranging from infant to teenager, and Retta's mother, ancient and sharp-eyed, presiding over it all like a queen. 30 years, Marga said, raising her cup, and you still look at her the same way you did on that muddy road. Roland grinned, unashamed. She is still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Even covered in garden dirt, Retta asked, especially then. The grandchildren giggled, and the adults groaned, and Retta shook her head but could not stop smiling. This was her life. This loud, chaotic, beautiful life, full of people she loved and who loved her back. After dinner, when the children were chasing each other through the orchard and the adults were trading stories on the porch, Roland took Retta's hand and led her away from the noise, up to the hilltop that overlooked both villages. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, and below them the fields stretched out in a patchwork of green and brown, threaded through with the silver line of the bull's run. Beautiful, Retta said. It is. But Roland was not looking at the view. He was looking at her, and his expression was soft with decades of affection. I meant what I said earlier. You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. You are sentimental. I am honest. He tucked a strand of gray-streaked hair behind her pointed ear. Retta, you have given me the best life I could have imagined. You, our children, this place we have built together. I hope you know that. I do. She leaned into his touch. You have given me the same, Roland. You have given me trust and love, and proof that some people really do mean what they say. I always will. They stood there together as the sun sank below the horizon, and Retta thought about the girl she had been, cautious and guarded, convinced that everyone wanted something from her. She thought about the man who had waded into the mud without being asked, who had spent a fortune on a channel because it was right, who had courted her with strawberries and terrible excuses and relentless, honest affection. She thought about the life they had built, brick by brick, season by season, and felt grateful beyond words. You remember what you said to me the night you proposed? She asked. Roland smiled. I said several things. You will have to be more specific. You said when you looked at the future, the only version that made sense was the one where I was in it. I remember. That is still true, Retta said quietly. Every future I imagine, you are there. You always will be. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Retta kissed him back. 30 years of love and trust and partnership in that single moment. When they walked back down the hill toward the house, toward the noise and light and laughter, Retta felt complete. Not because the story had ended, but because it had not. It was still going, still growing, branching out into children and grandchildren, and a future she could not fully see but trusted would be good, because she had learned to trust. Because a man had pulled her cart from the mud and then stayed, day after day, year after year, proving that his love was not a trick or a ploy but a simple, honest truth. The villages called him the bull, and they said it with respect now, with affection. But Retta called him Roland, called him husband, called him home. And that, in the end, was all the name that mattered. Marcus took over more and more of the farm work as Roland aged, strong and capable, and Retta handed off the market stall to Juliet entirely, when her knees protested too much on cold mornings. They settled into a slower rhythm, one of grandchildren visiting and long evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields they had worked for decades. Retta's mother passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93, surrounded by family, and the joint villages mourned her together. She had been there from the beginning, had started the nickname that defined Roland's place in their community, had welcomed him into the family with laughter and open arms. "She liked you from the start," Retta told him at the funeral. "She had good taste," Roland replied, and even through grief, Retta smiled. The years continued their steady march. Grandchildren became teenagers, then adults. Great-grandchildren arrived, a new generation that would never know a time when the villages were not allied, when human and orc did not trade freely and intermarry and build lives together. On their 40th anniversary, the family gathered again, and this time there were too many people to fit around even the expanded table. They spilled out into the yard, sitting on blankets and benches, and Juliet stood up to speak. "40 years ago," she said, "my father pulled my mother's cart out of the mud, and then he kept pulling, kept working, kept showing up, until he had pulled 2 villages out of fear and suspicion and into something better. He dug a channel that still waters our fields. He built a marriage that still inspires us, and he showed us all what it means to commit to something, to someone, and never waver." She raised her cup and the crowd followed suit. "To my parents, to 40 years, to the bull and the woman who tamed him." "I did not tame him," Retta protested. "He was always this ridiculous." "You love it," Roland said, automatic and fond, and the family dissolved into laughter. That night, after everyone had gone home or bedded down in various corners of the house, Retta and Roland lay in their bed and listened to the quiet. "40 years," Retta said softly, "best 40 years of my life. Even the hard parts, especially those." He rolled to face her, and even in the darkness she could see the outline of his smile. "The hard parts are what made it matter, Retta. The drought, the fear, the work. We got through it together. That is what I am proud of." She reached for his hand, and his fingers laced through hers automatically, a gesture they had done 10,000 times. "I am proud, too, of us, of what we built. We built something good. We did." They fell asleep like that, hands joined, and Retta dreamed of muddy roads and strawberries, and a man who had loved her so completely that she had learned to love herself the same way. Roland's health began to fail in their 45th year. Nothing dramatic, just a slow winding down, joints that ached more, breath that came harder after exertion. He grumbled about it, made jokes, and kept working until Marcus physically removed the tools from his hands. "You are retired," Marcus said firmly. "Let me do this. I can still help. You can still supervise, from the porch, with a cup of tea." Roland looked to Retta for support, but she just shook her head. "Listen to your son." So he supervised, sitting on the porch with his tea, and if he occasionally wandered down to offer unsolicited advice, well, Marcus tolerated it with good humor. Retta's own health held steady, stubbornness keeping her mobile when her body wanted to slow, but she could feel time pressing in at the edges. They were old now, truly old, and the awareness of it sat between them like a third presence. No regrets. Roland asked one evening, and Retta heard the echo of her own question from decades past. "None," she said firmly. "You. Only that I did not meet you sooner," he smiled. "Think of all the strawberries I could have brought you. You brought me enough. Never enough." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the stars came out, the same stars that had watched them fall in love, marry, raise children, build a legacy. "I love you," Retta said, simple and true. "I love you too," Roland replied. "Always have, always will." It was enough. It had always been enough. When Roland passed, it was quietly in his sleep with Retta beside him. She woke to find his hand still in hers and his breathing stilled, and she sat there for a long moment, just looking at him, memorizing the face she had loved for 47 years. Then she kissed his forehead and called for the children. The villages came together to mourn him, a funeral that stretched across both settlements and drew people from miles away. They told stories of the bull, of his strength and kindness, of the channel he had dug and the bridges he had built, both literal and metaphorical. Retta stood beside the grave and listened to the tributes, and when it was her turn to speak, she kept it simple. "He was a good man," she said. "He saw something that needed doing and did it. He loved completely and without reservation, and he made me believe that I was worth loving just as I was." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "I will miss him every day, but I am grateful for every moment we had." They buried him on the hill overlooking the villages, where he could watch over the fields and the channel, and the life he had helped build. Retta lived another 3 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and if she was quieter without Roland beside her, she was no less loved. She spent her days in the garden, teaching the youngest grandchildren about soil and seeds, and her evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over familiar land. Juliet worried that she was lonely, but Retta shook her head. "I had 47 years with your father. That is more than most people get. I am not lonely. I am grateful." On a spring morning, exactly 50 years after Roland had pulled her cart from the mud, Retta woke feeling light and strange. She dressed slowly, walked out to the garden, and stood looking at the river in the distance, the bull's run threading through the fields like a silver promise. She thought about the girl she had been, guarded and suspicious. She thought about the man who had loved her into softness, into trust, into joy. She thought about the life they had built, the children they had raised, the villages they had united, and she thought, clear as daylight, "I am ready." Juliet found her that afternoon, sitting peacefully in the garden with a smile on her face, and knew immediately that she was gone. They buried her beside Roland, and the whole region came to mourn and celebrate. The joint villages declared a day of remembrance, honoring both the bull and his wife, the couple who had shown them what was possible when fear gave way to trust. Years later, when travelers asked about the channel that watered the inland fields, locals would tell them the story. About the man who pulled a cart from the mud and was called the bull ever after. About the orc woman who married him and built a life that spanned 2 villages. About the channel that saved them all, and the love that made it possible. The story changed in the telling, details added and smoothed away, but the heart of it remained true. 2 people saw each other clearly, loved each other completely, and built something that lasted. The bull's run still flows, carrying water to the fields, carrying the story forward into new generations. And on spring mornings, when the sun hits the water just right, locals swear you can see 2 figures standing on the hill, hand in hand, watching over the land they loved. It is probably just a trick of the light, but it is a beautiful story nonetheless, and in a world that needs beautiful stories, that is enough. Their great-great-grandchildren work the fields now, human and orc side by side, and if you ask them about the bull and his wife, they will smile and tell you what they know. That love is not always easy, but it is always worth it. That trust, once earned, can move mountains or at least dig channels. That the best legacies are the ones built on kindness, effort, and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. The villages thrive, trade flourishes, and the old suspicions are just that. Old, fading, nearly forgotten. New challenges arise, as they always do, but the foundation is strong, built by a man and a woman who chose each other, and then chose, every day, to keep choosing. And somewhere, perhaps, Roland and Retta watch and smile, knowing that what they started continues, growing and branching like the crops they once tended, bearing fruit long after they are gone. It is a good legacy, a good life, a good love, and in the end, that is all anyone can hope for.